I want to thank Michael and Estelle Stein again for sponsoring this series. He's one of our trustees for many years, and he's been asking me to do this for about 2 decades. So thank you, Michael and Estelle. And I want to thank you all really for participating. You've made it a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying this. I love the interaction. I love the I love the spunkiness that everybody's in on it, and you're comfortable sharing, learning together. This was my vision when I started this, when I did this series. I was hoping that it would turn into something like this, and it really is everything I hoped for. I hope you feel the same way. Just a note, in preparing tonight's talk, I looked carefully at all the information that I wanted to share with you. I did not want to rush through it, so I'm going to be doing another session next week at the same time, Tuesday night at 9:30 p.m. I have to send you a new invitation, so if you registered here, I have your information. I'll be sending out an email to the group with an invitation for next week. Again, it was really important material, and some of it I just felt we should spend more time really discussing it. One more thing on rules of the road, the way we set things up and the way you all voted for in a survey we did is that if you have a question, not a question, a what if question or anything else like that, if it's just clarification, what did you mean by this? Feel free to, you can just put up a digital hand or a hand, but only if it's something that you didn't understand. Other than that, we'll leave everything for the Q&A. Okay, let's get started. So the big idea was mentor supervisor. That's something that we've been talking about throughout, and I'm going to be mentioning it at the end of the talk again, and a lot of it next week. And the big idea was that a supervisor is someone who supervises, you know, that you're there, you're setting the rules, which are important, and you're offering consequences if things don't work the way you like. But most people would not confide in a supervisor. It's just the way, that's the way it is, right? Very few people are going to go over to the supervisor at work and say, oh, by the way, you know, I'm really messing up, or tell them some other personal problem that you have. Whereas a mentor, if you're fortunate to have one, a mentor is someone that you really do confide in, and you seek their guidance, and you actively appreciate that level of interaction. So we were talking about parenting our children, mentor, supervisor, or both. You know, how do we view our things, our roles here? And you know, I've been encouraging you to think not only about a supervisor. There are some things that we have to do as supervisors, but think more as a mentor. So because that really allows you to parent your kids when they need it most. And again, we're going to be doing a lot of that next week. But it's a theme that we've been really working on throughout the sessions. Tonight's talk is called Bedrock. And what I mentioned last week that we're going to be talking about Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how that relates to our parenting and our lives. And I'll just skip ahead to this for a moment. This is a theory by Abraham Maslow. The theory basically is, we just touched upon it very briefly last week, because last week we were talking mostly about personality profiles, and we were talking about how to find an answer key. How can you find an answer key? Meaning, if your child is not doing well, how can you find an answer key? How can you figure out what's going on? So we have, last week we talked about personality profiles and other things to look at. Today we're going to be talking about bedrock, about security, about safety, and about how to make your kids as comfortable as possible. First, we'll start with some scenarios. Bela, if I can ask you, I don't see my picture on the upper screen. It's probably a settings thing.
Can I spotlight you?
Yeah, no, yeah, to just like to have my, not just me. Yeah, okay, that's fine, perfect. Okay, thank you so much, because I wanted it to come out in the recording actually. Okay, thank you. So here are four scenarios. We're actually only going to cover one of them tonight and 3 next week. That's why I had to split them up to really do a deep dive into them. So scenario number 1 is our daughter was always a good student and a great kid. In the fall of 2019, the wheels seem to have come off almost overnight, describing a very rapid decline. And we're going to talk, obviously, about that. And these are the things that we're looking for. Scenario number 2 is we're trying to separate our 11th grade son from bad friends, quote unquote. We haven't been very successful. Any suggestions? Scenario 3, again, these are all very practical. Some of the things that some of you have sent in and some of the things that I've been doing for 40 years, dealing with adolescents. So scenario 3 is we found that our son's been drinking at Shalom Zacher. Shalom Zacher is a party in someone's home Friday night. If they have a son during the week, if they had a baby boy. So it's called a Shalom Zacher. And there's some alcohol there he's been drinking. And he said, hey, listen, number 1, I'm not addicted. And number 2, look, I'll stop drinking out of the house if you just bring alcohol into the house. What do you do? Common scenario, but it's a big deal. And scenario 4 is our 19-year-old daughter is no longer Shabbos observant. She's our oldest. We're very concerned on how it will affect the younger siblings. Any suggestions? And we're going to be going into this. I like starting with the end in mind because, like as I've been saying all along, there's theory and practice. So I think a good talk has a blend between theory, meaning why are we doing this, and tachlis, what should I be doing differently, Word or Excel, right? Like we talked about last week. Is it, a theory of why we're doing this? And then bottom line, what should I be doing in our home? It's nice, Horowitz, all of this theory, but like brass tacks, what am I doing about all of these things? So let's talk about Maslow. And honestly, folks, my dear friends, this is one of the most important things that you can, that I encourage you to think about as parents. I learned this many years ago in college. It's one of the famous things they teach you in early psychology classes or other things like that, sociology. And basically his theory is that there are 5 sets of human needs and they're sequential, meaning you can't get to level 2 here. I'm using my cursor here, which is safety, without taking care of the physical needs. And so on and so forth. You can't really love and belong and have intimacy and friendship if you don't have one of those 2. Self-esteem builds on after you have relationships, family, and self-actualization. In Yiddish, we call this to steig, to be all you could be, like the had in the ad of the Marines. I had the great zchus to be married to be in chinuch and Jewish education, lived really for almost 40 years. And I've always thought about this as number 1 when I was trying to find the answer key for one of my students or people in my life, or later on dealing with teens at risk. And the way I think of it from the bottom up. So if a child is acting out, if a child is not actualizing, and they're not studying well, they're fighting around, their self-esteem is low, well, working your way backwards, they're having difficulty in their relationships with their friends, with their family. I always think to myself, 3 square meals a day, is the child being fed well? Are they getting enough sleep? Is everything in order in their physical life? Then how are they feeling safe? And again, we'll discuss details about this before getting to these other things. That's really how I trained myself to think like Maslow, and it hasn't served me wrong over the years. I found that this is really an extraordinary, like any theory, that you can poke holes in it and ask some questions about it. I can tell you a few questions that I have on it, but overall, it's a very wise theory, and I think worthy of thinking about in so many ways as parents. Let's give some practical examples, okay? Just a moment. Okay, so let's take example number 1. I really am using these examples because Maslow's hierarchy of needs is going to be a real underpinning of what we're doing tonight and tomorrow and the next week. So I really want you to understand it well, and I want you to understand, in my opinion, it's something almost that you can't do anything about. It just is, because it's such an important facet of how our minds work and how our lives work. So your car breaks down. Your car breaks down on the. I'm reading from here on the left side, right? Example 1. Your car breaks down on the wrong side of the tracks. Your car breaks down in a bad neighborhood. Yeah, I didn't write this here, but you have 2% on your battery. Okay, let's take the equivalent, in today's vernacular of being really messed up, right? You have 2% on your battery. Your car's broken down. You're really afraid for your life. So Maslow would say that you might have your biological and physiological needs. You may have that taken care of. You may have had a good meal. You're physically fine, but you're terrified. Now, your life coach, let's say you've been working with a life coach, and he or she has been talking about setting 5-year goals for yourselves. You say, I'm not achieving everything I want to. You meet with this life coach, and he or she says, you know what, why don't you articulate 5-year goals for yourself? And we'll talk about it later in the week, okay? So now it was later in the week. You get a phone call, and this guy he or she wants to talk to you on the phone. Now, just imagine you're on the side of the road, you're feeling really, really unsafe. This guy comes along and wants to talk about 5-year goals. 5-year goals is the 5th level here, self-actualization. You're not feeling safe. I could almost guarantee you that you're going to say something like, or think something like, 5-year goals, I don't know if I'll be alive in 5 minutes. So you really, physically, you can't get into a higher order thinking skill. You can't get into this self-actualization, which is beautiful, it's Gan Eden, it's paradise when you get to grow like this, but you can't do it if it's not working right now, okay? So that's example number 1, a practical example. You're not feeling safe. You're being schlepped in. Someone's trying to draw you into a level 3 conversation, a level 5 conversation, which is about self-actualizing. It's just not going to happen in all likelihood because your brain is not at ease. Here's a really practical example for parents. And this, again, we're thinking about answer keys. I really encourage you to think about this example, not only in this facet, but in many variations of this. Okay, mom says, sweetheart, please do your homework. And your daughter says, no, somebody's bullying me in school. Someone's hurting me on the bus, or someone's nasty to me in the thing. And you say, okay, sweetheart, why don't you do your homework and then we'll talk about it later. Maslow would say, again, there's a safety deficit. It's just, she might do it because she might not want to be punished, or she might want to, but you can bet your bottom dollar that she's not going to really be concentrating well. Okay, and you could think about this thing with the car breaking down on the wrong side of the tracks. There's so many applications of this. Think of if you live in the New York area, how do you feel after Hurricane Sandy, not having power for 5 days or 10 days? I remember myself. It was actually rather amusing. I happened to have been fortunate enough to get a generator before Sandy hit. And we actually had power at home. We lost all our power here in Muncie. Everybody did. And I was sitting there. I remember saying to myself, I was still in Yeshiva at the time. School was closed. I said, this is Gan Eden. I can do all the writing projects that I wanted to. It's quiet. I have nowhere to go. There's no place to go. I can't go anywhere if I want to. There's no work. There's no nothing. And I found that I just didn't have the menucha, even though I had a generator working outside. And then, because I wasn't really settled. And then there was a gas shortage, day 3 or 4. And that was just gone. Even though I had 2 full canisters of gas there, I kept hearing the generator ticking out there, thinking to myself, okay, soon I'm not going to have power either. So this is really powerful stuff. So if your children have issues that they can't deal with, just understand that this is very real. Another application, I just thought of this in Yiddish, a Faher means an examination. So I would do an oral examinations of my students. I would go into class and ask them questions about Chumash, about Gemara, whatever they were learning at any given time. And I realized I had an issue with one of my students that related to Maslow. And I don't know, I was thinking about it as I was walking in to test to Faher class, to test one of the classes. And typically I would go around the room and ask random questions. And I remember saying to myself when I walked into the room, I said, Yankee, practice what you preach. If you're calling on kids, maybe the kids are not comfortable. Maybe they don't know all of the Gemara. And maybe when you call on them, you're creating anxiety. So I wrote here, what are they thinking about? So I'm trying to engage them, again, going back to Maslow here, I'm trying to engage them in self-actualization, in steiging and growing and all of that stuff. And they might really be nervous about being called on. And that I'm getting into a Tosfos, commentaries on the Talmud, on the Gemara, and the kids are thinking, okay, is he going up the rows or down the rows? Is he going by the alphabet, ABC? Is there some random system that he has? I haven't been called on in the last two Fahers. Is it my turn now? So I walked into class. I said, all right, guys, you know what? We're going to start a new thing right now. Anybody could say pass. All you have to do is say pass. I won't hold it against you. I'll just assume that you didn't, whatever you wanted to say, a different piece of Gemara. And I noticed that the whole class relaxed. And I got better quality answers and learning out of the kids. Okay, one final one, just a Torah source. I found this is my own thought. Feel free to disagree. This is only Yankee. There's a fascinating exchange in Parshas Va'era when Moshe Rabbeinu comes to take the Bnei Israel out of Egypt, and Hashem tells him, speak to the Jewish people, and they're going to listen to you. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu talks to them, and I'll give you the text in a minute. He says, basically, I'm going to take you out of the land of Egypt where they were being oppressed. It so happens that these are the four kossos, the four glasses of wine that we drink on Pesach, are we have Hatzeisi, Vitalti, Vigalti, Lakachti. I'll take you out, I'll redeem you, I'll free you, and I'll bring you to Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel. And it says, here's the text, Vayidaber Moshe came to Bnei Israel. This is what Moshe said. V'lo shamu al Moshe, the Jews didn't listen to Moshe, mikotza ruach, they had short of breath, and they avoid kasha from hard work. So they didn't listen to Moshe. Moshe said, I'm going to take you out of here. And they said, they couldn't hear what he was saying. Why? Because they were oppressed. Now, one of the famous jails in the New York area is called Rikers Island. Okay, it's a pretty rough place there. Now, just get this in your mind now. Imagine a delivery truck pulls up, and the guy whispers he sees two inmates there, and he says, "Hey, guys, come on over here. Jump in the back of the truck. No one checks me on the way out." And okay, so they have a 25-year sentence. They have an opportunity for freedom, and they suddenly say, "Oh, well, one second, just a minute now. The warden is making me crazy. These guards are bothering me. Forget it. I can't come." Right? That would be a reason to jump on the truck. So they didn't listen to Moshe Rabbeinu because they were short of breath. They couldn't relax. So that should have been a reason that they should listen. So I want to suggest as follows. Listen to Moshe speaking and think of Maslow. Okay? Moshe Rabbeinu says like this. I'm going to redeem you from Mitzrayim. That's number 1 or 2, right? I'll get you freedom and you'll be safe. V'tzalti eschem, I'll save you from the hard work. I'll redeem you. V'ga'alti eschem. Now, then he starts. I would like to suggest Moshe Rabbeinu jumps to 5, and he starts talking to them. I'll bring you. You'll become my nation, and Hashem will be your God, and I'll bring you to the land of Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel. I believe that that's when he lost them. The first 3 they were fine with, but that's my own interpretation. That they lost them because it was just too much. Okay, so again, I'm sorry I spent this much time with different examples, although some of you wanted it in the survey. But it's so important that you understand that it's almost like a rule of nature that gravity brings things down towards the earth. It just doesn't work. And the more you can think about looking at something and thinking what's going on here, the better you'll be able to help your kids. I happen to have realized this in my eureka moment was when I realized about 18 years ago that so many children were being abused because, and this is something for parents to think about, not chas v'shalom only about abuse, but children being in a bad spot. I had a group of people that I was dealing with and trying to figure out why the kids were self-destructing. And it seemed, according to Maslow, I knew some of these families, everything seemed right. And they were still self-destructing. And I remember thinking to myself, what would Maslow say? This doesn't make sense. It's like they got destroyed from within. And I said, oh my goodness, they were molested. And I called the parents and they all said, nothing, it's not true. And then they checked and every one of those kids had been abused. That's when I started writing about it. So going back to the situation where we had this scenario number one, I found over the years that when you see a rapid decline, you see, if you notice that, remember last week I was saying, listen carefully, that Hasidic parent who spoke to me about their kid was in the room and what wasn't coming out for anything. And I said, listen carefully, what exactly did he say? He said that it's all words to me. And they're learning the same thing again and again. This is a big deal. When you see children, a rapid decline, it's very, very likely trauma related. So my advice to parents, if you're looking, if it's a child of yours, if it's something that doesn't seem to make sense and you see a tremendous decline, like almost overnight or over the period of a few weeks, I would encourage you. It doesn't necessarily mean child abuse. It doesn't necessarily mean sexual abuse, but it usually is a trauma related because it's so much harder for them to concentrate on where we are. And here's one of my main points tonight, is I encourage you to think of your role as parents to provide those two levels. So because we want our children to have family connection with us and eventually, God willing, intimacy, where they get into a loving relationship with their spouse, and they have family connections and friendships, because we want them to have that, and because we want them to going up the ladder, right? To have respect, status, recognition, self-esteem, to feel good about themselves, and to be all they could be. That's not the only reason you should do it, but I really encourage you to think as parents, not only providing for the physiological needs, but providing them with a sense of safety. And I encourage you to think about that as one of your primary roles. And I just want to talk to you about child safety. I'm not going to spend that much time on this, but I do want to go through, the family component of child safety and the community component of child safety. Some of this you may have heard. I don't believe that you've heard that much on the community, and I think it's really, really, really important that you think of it in those terms also. So let's get to it. So the family child safety component, is educating your children about child safety education. If you, let me just make a note now to remember, in the email when I send out the video, the YouTube video of this talk, I'll send you a 9-minute video it's a free video that talks about child safety in greater detail. Excuse me. And thankfully there are lots of sources that you can use to learn about it. So what you basically, child safety, the experts in the field say that these are the child safety messages. Now, this doesn't have to do with supervision. That's a separate thing. In other words, this isn't everything related to child safety, but I've been doing talks on this for over 15 years. And, I studied at the feet of the top people in the film world and in child abuse prevention and the like, and people in the non-Jewish world. And these were the things that came up about messages to children. Number one is no secrets from parents, to teach your children that no one's ever allowed to tell them to keep a secret from you. Your body belongs to you, which is overall the concept of self-ownership, that you own, your body is something of yours. I'm going to go over each of these in a little bit more greater detail. We'll discuss a little bit more about what that looks like. Good touching, bad touching. Some touching is okay. Some touching is not okay. One way to say this, for example, is some place covered by a bathing suit is not appropriate to be touching, and no one has the right to make you feel uncomfortable. Message number 4 is more complicated than the others because it's it's not as clear and crisp as the other ones. And I'll just go. Let me just go through these. So message number 1, excuse me, no secrets. Predators don't want children speaking to their parents regularly. Okay, obviously, one of the justices, Supreme Court justices famously said that if you want to catch a thief, you have to think like a thief. So think like a predator. The abusers, the worst thing for them, I mean, one of the things they're afraid of is that the children will tell their parents. So that's something by establishing regular contact and talking to your children regularly. Get them in the habit when they come home to share their day with you. They can talk to you about anything. That's something you can start very young. And someone telling your children to keep a secret from you is a huge red flag. No one should ever do this. I was a school principal. I'm a rabbi. I should never, ever, ever be telling a student of mine, don't, this is between us. So this is a real red flag. So you tell your children, if somebody does tell you to keep secrets from us, that's a no. Please tell us, and we'll be very grateful that you came. Okay, your body belongs to you is the concept of the ownership of their space. Look at the second bullet I said here. Think, how old does a child have to be to understand the concept of ownership? Very young, right? Your children know at a very young age, what their blankets, their pacifiers, their favorite, they know almost like very, very young that things belong to them. So you train them that they belong to them. And especially in the Orthodox Jewish world, where we spend so much time, these wonderful messages that we should continue to teach about sharing, about tzedakah, about the charity, about respect for elders, about respect for people in the clergy or rabbanim or leaders of the community or school principals. So all of those things are good. You shouldn't tell your children not to respect them. But because of that, you teach them that they have this concept of ownership of themselves. And the research shows that even having a designated drawer at home, even something as small as that, makes children more likely to protect themselves when something comes up. This is a page from our child safety book. It's called Let's Stay Safe. And this is just a page, this is the only page from the book I had, but just to see the concept, right? I have the ball, I have my knapsack, I have stuff, that's mine. My body is also private, okay? And it's important to note that the research shows that we're not supposed to frighten our children when we have these conversations with them, because Maslow would say, right, their brains shut down if we frighten them. So it should be a relaxed conversation. Dr. David Palkowitz always said a moderate amount, like from 1 to 10, a 2 or a 3, or 4 maybe. In other words, important enough to know that it's not like don't chew with your mouth open. It's more serious than that. But they don't. If you say it with the anxiety that you feel, it's going to be too much, and you'll bug the kids out. Okay, so that's a concept of self-ownership. Good touching, bad touching. Anything covered by a bathing suit is a good way to do this. Anything covered by a bathing suit is private. And this is really important to list exceptions to the rules very carefully. I'm just making another note to send you body boundaries. I did a talk with the police chief of Tenafly, New Jersey. And he was absolutely brilliant, and he gave a number of rules about this. I'll send you the link to his video. But the exceptions, the reason you have to list exceptions very carefully is, sadly, and I know really none of us want to believe it, we can't believe it, but it just is, most of the abuse takes place from people in our inner circle, orphan family. So if you say something like, no one's allowed to touch you in a private spot except for people in our family, you're setting yourself up for problems that, that might, chas v'shalom, turn south if somebody in the family wants to chas v'shalom harm them. So what you say is much more like only mommy and daddy, abba and ima, a babysitter when we're not here, Bubby, grandma, when if she's watching you, a doctor during a visit, very, very tight and very limited so that children will know it's only that. And here, as I mentioned, this last one is a little more difficult to convey, and it's no one has the right to make you feel uncomfortable. And that's really an idea, so it's not as simple as the other one. The other ones, I'm making a note to send you an article I wrote called The Halo Effect. And the concept is, this is actually, the police chief said exactly these words. He said, it, not whom, meaning that you train yourself to think that if somebody's doing something and the thing isn't right, but the person is right. Let me offer it differently. I'm sorry, maybe I perhaps wasn't clear. When we make a value judgment, we usually put two things together. We take two things together. One is the action. The second is who did that action. And there's a whole discussion going on in our great country about this concept of it, not whom, as it relates to African Americans, are they being mistreated? I'm not going into the details. I think social justice is important, and I think, I certainly hope our imperfect democracy moves forward to becoming more and more perfect as time goes on. But that's the concept. The folks are saying that it's the whom. You're judging me by the way I look, not by what I did. So here's a much softer example of the concept. The concept is that you take the action and you take the person who did it, and you make those two, you evaluate and you decide how nervous you should be, like how much of how do you grade this? So here's a simple example. Let's say you walk into a shul one morning. Okay, you walk into synagogue one morning. Remember that shul? You walk into shul in the morning. You're the second person in shul. The first person is standing near the Aron Kodesh, near the Ark, and he's taking single dollar bills out of a charity box. Okay, that's what you saw. That's the it. Now the whom is a very distinguished person in the community. So you take the it. That looks pretty suspicious, taking money out of a charity box, out of a tzedakah box. The whom was somebody respected. It's your friend, your best friend. You know him for 30 years. So you say, okay, the thing doesn't look good, but he did it, can't be. So you put the two of them together and you say, nothing to worry about. The guy probably put a $20 bill in right before I came in, and he's taking change, okay? If it's somebody that looks suspicious, you'll pick up a phone and call the police, okay? You saw the same thing, you mixed it with who did it, okay? And the halo effect, if you're interested in looking up, I'm going to send you an article. I wrote it during the Nehemiah Weberman trial. The halo effect basically means, a halo is, like angels, mythically we have that, it's represented like that in imagery, that they have a halo around their heads. The halo effect means, it was research done originally in the army, that if people look a certain way and they're put together and they're handsome and they're, they're attractive, they're well dressed, you're less likely to think that they did something wrong. So it was originally done, sergeant's evaluations, they were giving better evaluations to the handsome soldiers than the ones who didn't look that put together. And the halo effect becomes very dangerous because we say it can't be that this, but we have that same reaction, God forbid, whenever there's a scandal, so many times, I always say it's not the fellow in the raincoat that had, the weirdo in the raincoat, so to speak, that a maladjusted person that does abuse, although that happens, but it's very rare. It's much more likely to be a charming person. And when it's somebody you respect, you say, it can't be. Here's another example of a halo effect that I often use. If you're in shul and the Baal Kriya, the one who reads the Torah, For those who aren't familiar, the Torah doesn't have, the Torah scroll doesn't have punctuation. So somebody reads the weekly portion, the Torah, the Parashat Shavua, from the Sefer Torah. Now, imagine you have a superstar Balkari, as it's called, and never made a mistake in 30 years. And he makes a bad mistake one day. I know what I would do. I could almost guarantee you that you're not going to raise your voice and say, hey, you made a mistake. Why? Because you're going to think to yourself, that guy never made it, he hasn't made a mistake in 30 years. Like maybe his grandfather had a different custom, so I'm not going to make a fool out of myself and yell in public and say, hey, and even politely, you made a mistake, because he never makes mistakes. This is what happens when we get into trouble. We get into trouble when we start making these assumptions about people based on the halo effect. And finally, this thing about being uncomfortable, this is my, I'll try to remember to send you a link to this also. This is my #1 recommendation for an article. I'm not talking about books or research papers. An article written by Malcolm Gladwell, the one who wrote Tipping Point and Blink and Outlier and other books like that. So he wrote a book. He wrote a book called an article. Excuse me. It was a New Yorker magazine called In Plain View. It's a must-read for every parent. Some of it might make you a little queasy, might take away your lower levels of Maslow, but it's really important. And what he talks about is how, this is Jerry Sandusky. There was a terrible scandal in Penn State University. Joe Paterno was a beloved coach, by all accounts, a very decent man, cared about the kids, was in scholarships for them, and made sure he was supposed, certainly seemed like a wonderful person. There was a guy under him, Sandusky, who was a terrible abuser, and he got away with abusing kids for many years. And Malcolm Gladwell talks about how the grooming process works. You can see it even at the beginning. He talks about a fellow named Clay, and I really encourage you to read it to see how the grooming process works. So therefore, it's something that I just encourage you to think about. Again, those 4 messages and the reasons we say them all. I want to talk to you about communal safety, because I don't think there's enough discussion about this. And folks, these next few minutes, honestly, I think it's worth the whole talk just for this. How safe is your community? I'm asking all of you. I know some of you I got to know, but I certainly don't know most of you well. I really encourage you to think about it. I have my own chiddush, my own idea of how to assess this, but I can tell you folks, from my experience, not all communities have the same abuse rate. And it's logical that they wouldn't, because it depends what they do. It depends what the leadership does. How can you assess your community's risk level? And it's important because where you live makes a big difference. And if it's not in order, try to do something. Or if you're thinking about moving and selecting, give this assessment tool. This is Yankee's take on it, folks. This is such an emotional subject, this whole child abuse thing, as it should be. And it's very difficult to have a rational conversation about it. So I was thinking to myself, how can I make this point with no emotion? How can I do it with only Excel and no Word? And I came up with this idea of making an assessment tool. So here's the example. How do you calculate car insurance premiums? Okay, you go to Geico, you go to any one of the main companies, or not so main companies, and you say, how much is my premium going to be? So they'll ask you these questions, or they'll look up your record. How many accidents or claims did you make in the past 5 years? What's your driving record? How many moving violations did you have? What's your zip code? Are there a lot of thefts, a lot of stealing of cars in your neighborhood? Do you have teenage drivers at home? How many of them? We once had 4 teenage drivers. You can imagine what our insurance rates were at the time. So this is an assessment tool that a car, the company, the underwriters of this policy, it's not personal, it's not Word, it's all Excel, it's just numbers. but they feed these numbers into a program. There's an algorithm that kicks out kicks out a premium depending on how high risk you are or low risk you are. Okay, here's where the rubber meets the road, folks. Here's the Yankee take on this. Imagine if you had a health insurance plan, okay? You had with one of the large, Oxford, Aetna, you had a regular policy for a regular health plan. And there are riders, there's a rider. I mean, rider means like something extra. There's a dental insurance rider. You can buy for extra money, you pay for dental insurance. How about if there was a premium that a family paid in case, God forbid, chas v'shalom, if one of their children were abused, they would get free treatment for life. Okay, that's the policy. You take a regular health insurance policy, you have some other policies that you take, but there's a rider there that gets the family coverage, drug rehab, whatever it is. If a child is abused, how does that adjuster evaluate your community? What would he ask? Remember these questions that we had here? Folks, I think this is the most important takeaway from tonight. Okay? The car insurance, no emotion. These are the questions they ask. If I was an adjuster and they asked me to assess risk, these are the things I would say. How safe is your community? Is there ongoing child safety education? I hope you're answering great answers to all of these. Okay? Do the children get educated? Is there training for teachers? Is there training for employees of schools and shuls and other institutions, day camps, summer camps? Are abusers reported to the authorities? If they're not reported to the authorities, of course the abuse rate is going to be higher. I would certainly charge a lot more money if I was the insurance company, if I heard that abusers are watched by are not reported to the authorities. You bet $1 that the abuse rates are going to be higher there. Do abuse victims receive emotional communal support? Meaning they're more likely to come forward. Are they getting professional treatment? So I can list you other things like this, but this is the big idea. And as uncomfortable as it may be for you, I really encourage you to think about not just your family, but your community. Is your community doing all it should in these areas? And I venture to say that if they're not, just again, take the emotion out of it. I didn't say anything about any community specifically. I purposely didn't. Although I have suspicions, and I think I can't stop my mind from wandering knowing what I know. But just take that all out. Just do it like a car insurance. Say, is our community doing everything we should? Are there protocols in schools? I didn't include this. There are other things I could say. Protocols means is a Rebbe, am I as a school principal, or when I was a Rebbe, should I be taking a kid out for a Slurpee? What's the school policy on that? Does your school have child's school have a policy? Not looking to make trouble, folks. I'm just trying to keep your kids safe. So does the school have a policy? Is it appropriate for a teacher to take a child home alone in a car? Kid misses the bus. Should a teacher take the child home if they're alone by themselves? Do bar mitzvah tutors, is it the culture that they go only in a public place or only to the child's home, let's say, while the parents are there? Or do they, go to a shul or a place that they're alone? I don't think anyone should be alone with a child. I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think the Slurpee thing is a good idea. It might be nothing. It might be grooming activities. We don't know. I certainly don't recommend that teachers and faculty members do this. But if you have protocols in the schools, then the rules are very clear. So again, I'll be glad to take questions. I imagine we might get a question or two on this. Feel free. Again, the stakes are too high, my dear friends. We spent, this is our sixth night together. I care for you. I care for your children. I'll take pot shots if someone wants to take some at me for saying this. I don't care really. I'm much more important that your children stay safe. So think about it. It doesn't mean if it's not being done that the people are terrible people. Maybe they didn't think about it. It wasn't like this when I started teaching. It wasn't like this 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Very few people had protocols. There wasn't child safety education on this level, but times have changed. And if you find this out, I'll be glad to take specific questions later. And if you have a question that you want to ask like this, feel free to block your picture or change your name now so that, just write anonymous or whatever it is, so you can ask an honest question. But I would say that if these things are not in order in your community, try to make it better. See if you could offer to help. See if you could offer to be of assistance in any way. Come to the school head and say, look, I would love to help pay for child safety training. I'll be glad to get some friends of mine together to pay for it. Think of it in those terms, but really assess your community's level. And the research says that I purposely, on the bottom it says, citations provided at the end of this. I'll stop the slideshow at the end and talk about that these are things that research shows doesn't mean kids will get abused, but they're more likely to be. What's the neighborhood's attitude about reporting? There is studies on this, reporting suspected abuse to the authorities, and it's perfectly logical. The abusers know they're evil and they're very good at this grooming thing, and they know which communities are not going to say anything. Unavailability or lack of social services, meaning support for families. Parents unavailable to children because, they employment or other reasons, meaning that if the supervision of the children is weaker, there's a higher instance of abuse. Again, these are things that the insurance adjuster would say. Lack of support from family and friends for childcare and emotional connection. Unfortunately, the abusers tend to flock or to go to people who don't have that level of emotional support, people who are loners, who don't, kids who are loners or adults. Again, if you have any questions on this, I'll be delighted. Not delighted. It'll be my honor to help. And high level of financial stress. So all of these things, again, all of these things are stressors. And so the first thing that the message was, we were talking about these scenarios. This first one, I said, if you see something, part of, last week we were talking about educational stuff. Let's talk about social emotional issues this week and next week. And let's talk about realizing that when you see something go from 0 to 60, chas v'shalom, or from 60 to 0, that's what I listen to on the phone or email when people call. And, they say, well, our son is having that. Well, when did it start? Was it over 2 years, or was it sudden? If you hear something sudden, then it's probably trauma related, or very likely to have been trauma related. And what's so important about this is if that is the case, virtually any intervention other than love, support, and counseling will be counterproductive. So it's so important that you set things up, that you're able to talk and listen and find out what's going on. Because if you see things like this, in all likelihood, there is stuff going on. This is what we're going to be talking about next week, and that's why I really wanted to give it its own night. Okay, this is an iceberg. We know that the vast majority of the iceberg is underwater. It has to do with flotation, and all of that in science. So next week, we're going to be talking about what you see and what you can only learn if your kid confides in you. And this goes back to the supervisor and mentor thing that we talked about. This area on top is what you wind up seeing. The social emotional, my child, let's say, I see my child is having, let's say, quote unquote, bad friends, or they stop going to shul. That you see. Do you see substance abuse? Are you seeing self-destructive behaviors? Are you seeing, this is below the surface. And next week, we'll talk about that blend of dealing with it, how to find out about it. We spoke already about, having your kids talk to you. But this is really where I see the next week's talk going. this was a research summary. If you remember, we did this in when we talked about what your kids tell you. These are 5 attributes of families that, what do families do who children confide in them, right? There's a level of trust, there's validation, parents don't freak out when they're told things, close relationships. It's not likely that you'll be able to develop this overnight. It's something that you invest in, being open and flexible, and time together as a family dynamic. All of this is research-based. And this is what we're going to be talking about next week, the bottom of the iceberg. Okay, so we're going to talk about being a parent who gets it, meaning to really start looking at the world and your family and your children in a very different light, being attuned to the facts of what's really going on. And that includes marking the back of your liquor bottles, a lot of very pragmatic things to start looking and finding out what's really going on, giving you the tools to effectively deal with the underwater stuff. And number 3 is a real issue. I'm certainly not minimizing it. It's how to parent a child who disappoints you and perhaps breaks your heart. And that is, that's been, our Torah didn't cover up on anything. The Torah discusses the struggles that our avos and imais, our patriarchs and matriarchs, the Chumash, the Torah did not cover up on challenges that they had with their children. I'm really going to spend quite a bit of time on number 3, talking about in a practical way what you can do as parents to try to, how to, on an emotional way, how to do it, and in a very practical way, how to do it, okay? So here's the research citations. So again, just to sum up, we were talking about, at the beginning, we were talking about those 4 scenarios. We concentrated on one. We're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and to think to yourself, what's going on that I don't see? Everything makes sense. There's always an answer key. Is Maslow's theory open to this type of interpretation? If you ask me, I had one story, many, but one in particular during Q&A. If you're interested, I'll be glad to share that other story with you, but it's so powerful and it's so profound. So include the social emotional piece in addition to the learning things and the things we talked about last week. Think about the social emotional piece and see how that can possibly provide you with an answer key so that you can more effectively help your children. Again, if you don't know what's going on, right? This is the whole point, right? If you can't figure out what's going on in some of these scenarios, it's very likely that you're not, how could you really expect to be able to deal with it effectively? Okay, so Lena, next week we have a full agenda, and I look forward to seeing you then. I'll be glad to take any questions.